I'd now like to welcome to the podium Sharon Danley. And as Sharon's coming to the podium, Sharon, do you need any tech support or the, no?
Okay, as long as we're getting it recorded.
Yes, we are.
That would be good.
Before you begin, I want to, we know each other, Mary Lou McPhedran, co-chair of the task force, and Sheila MacDonald, also a member of the task force.
Yes.
And I want to acknowledge the very strong contributions that you've already made to the previous task forces that reported, the last one being 15 years ago, and to thank you for that, and to thank you for making the time to be here with us today.
Well, thank you for the thank you. As you know, the survivors of medical abuse have been advocating, supporting other victims, and writing about this system of abuse for about a quarter of a century. And once again, we're here. The last time I was before you, Mary Lou, I had auburn hair. And while my hair has evolved, nothing with respect to doctors' sexual abuse seems to have. Too much time has passed, and the only change we see are some tweaks, diminishment of some abuses to, quote, simple assaults, and added levels of bureaucracy in the complaints process. But generally, it's business as usual. Protection for criminal offenders at the huge cost of victims. And why are we still trying to fix a broken system? So what's going to be different after this task force? Victims and their loved ones continue to experience negative effects, but what punishment is there for these criminals or deterrence for potential offenders? Nothing. Coming before you again has put me into another position of having to relive my past. I've worked very hard to keep myself from revisiting the abyss. For my presentation here today, I take huge umbrage based on experience that this may be just another smokescreen to quiet the public. This whole issue is simply institutional violence against women, cloaking itself as concerned with yet another task force. And please, I invite you to correct me if I'm wrong. In my own experience, due to the brutality of the CPSO tribunal, where I was not equal before the law, I developed PTSD, fibromyalgia, and lost incalculably. From our perspective, authorities are once again scratching their heads and expensing another consult because of the public's justifiable outrage. Does it hope to quell the public's demand and right to transparency, accountability, and offenders receiving the full extent of the law? Or do they really mean it this time? The CPSO discipline process is still only between the doctor and the tribunal, and the complainant may be called to testify, but with no protection still. Yet, the tribunal has the power to subpoena complaint psychiatric records, hold them in contempt, and offending doctors can appeal a guilty decision in the Ontario Court of Appeals. Talk about a skewed, closed-door, doctor-protecting, complaint-abusing system of injustice. The CPSO systematically and boldly proves it is a misogynistic, patriarchal fraternity that continues to terrorize victims and to betray the ethical, good doctors among them. The fact is, doctors must and should be held to a higher standard for criminal acts of sexual assault than a man on the street would. And the man on the street would be held to account and put on public record. Doctors have a fiduciary duty in law and to protect, and they're not meeting it. Other than the College of Nurses, the CPSO and some other colleges are indifferent to the plights of their victims and to the women violated under their privileged authority. In the CPSO allowed my psychiatric records to be used against me and against my vehement protests, yet nothing from the doctor's psychiatric history was brought forward. And these psychiatric records were proven factually inaccurate and distorted. But nevertheless, it was all dragged out and I had no legal standing or protection, which the college's lawyer for complainants absolutely guaranteed me I would have. Infantilizing and conflict of interest much. And this psychiatrist was later found guilty of OHIP fraud. As a result of the CPSO's inhumane tribunal system, I lost everything. My home, my business, my marriage, most of my friends of 20 years, and my 2 disabled children were the secondary victims. I was the victim not once, but twice. First, by Dr. Cameron, and secondly and more severely by the CPSO's tribunal. I had the audacity to report this doctor's sexual violation. Dr. Cameron and the CPSO did the crimes, but I paid the time. After a 4-year process, Cameron was found guilty of the soft term sexual impropriety. It almost sounds like a term from Downton Abbey, doesn't it? But in fact, it was sexual aggression and assault in the most egregious way. He violated a patient's caregiver while this 2.5-year-old patient was in cardiac crisis in the arms of his caregiver mom. Dr. Cameron had treated my son since birth and was well aware of his multiple problems. 2 months after he violated me, my son had had total repair at Sick Kids. And Dr. Cameron was alerted to my son's decline by another doctor before I made that emergency visit on that fateful day, which he completely ignored. Yet, the CPSO did not find Dr. Cameron guilty of medical negligence and revocation of license, even though his sexual violation overrode his duty and responsibility, and he diminished my son's cardiac crisis, putting my son at even greater risk. Directly after the reading of my victim impact statement, and because I was seriously broken, I was forced into homelessness, while this perpetrating doctor continued to enjoy his life. He hid in the Ontario Court of Appeals for 18 months. Exactly how does that work? And who paid for Dr. Cameron's legal bills? Don't we, the taxpayers, subsidize the Ontario Medical Association? I'm just asking, and it warrants an answer. And directly after submissions for penalty with the CPSO, and in an acute, vulnerable state, I was then assaulted by my chiropractor. Anybody with any understanding of sexual abuse knows predators can sense a victim and they act on it. Once again, my protests, testimony of my psychiatrist who has never met me or even talked to me, gave negatively tagged psychiatric labels on a paper I had presented to the Naturopathy Symposium as a survivor of sexual abuse by a doctor. Psychiatry, yes, many of us know the problems inherent there. And the CPSO insists that victims go to therapists for therapy from doctor abuse. BHOD, banging head on desk, which is a social media term for extreme frustration. Dr. Cameron continued working at East General Hospital until I alerted a journalist who exposed him. The hospital CEO, Gail Peach, stated if Cameron's guilt was overturned by the Court of Appeals, well, the hospital could be looking at a wrongful dismissal suit. Their concern for the doctor and the hospital and whatever legal protection their lawyers could provide them was their main concern. They had zero for the public. They should have warned his patients at the very least that he had been found guilty of sexual violations and was currently in the Court of Appeals. But they chose not to. When I finally got settled after 18 months of homelessness, I contacted the CPSO to find out the status of Dr. Cameron. I was informed by their lawyer, Duncan Newman, which we later discovered was disbarred while working for the CPSO, that they couldn't account for why Cameron was allowed to hang around the Court of Appeals for an extra 6 months. The college made no attempt to follow up on the case, nor did they explain why a disbarred lawyer was on their payroll. And Cameron retired immediately upon my questioning of why he didn't serve his 3-month paltry suspension of license. During the tribunal, the CPSO threatened me with contempt if I didn't answer questions about my sexual and incest history. Yet they didn't inquire into Cameron's sociopathic history. And the main excuse for his violations was, well, he was having trouble in his marriage at the time. They even allowed the case to be reopened on what proved to be false testimony of an ex-intimate with a vendetta, giving me less than 24 hours' notice. What they allowed Dr. Cameron character witnesses, but not me, because, you know, I was only the complainant or the witness. How can you be a witness to your own assault? They tried intensely to prove that as an incest survivor, I didn't know the difference between a sympathetic touch and a sexual aggression. Yet they refused to allow testimony of the other 6 mothers with disabled babies who were also victims of Dr. Cameron, this sick, sick doctor. This further attack on complainants is egregious beyond words. They allowed my inaccurate psychiatric history to be publicized and everything that would harm me to take place. Yet they allowed Dr. Cameron every protection. These actions show a deliberate provocation to further humiliate and terrorize victims, which we all know deters complainants. The fear of retribution silences the complaint process. And if victims do complain and get through the bureaucracy where there is still no protection, to the tribunal level, and I mean the story is perfect of what happens. I'm a good example. I received no apology or reparation from the CPSO. I was brutalized, re-victimized, labeled, and thrown to the curb, while every favor was afforded this violating doctor. My treatment is similar to so many others we've counseled and supported over the years. The CPSO and the other colleges enjoy the privilege of self-governing. That privilege must carry the serious weight of responsibility to patients and the public. The government is also complicit to date for not intervening when they were aware and asked on many occasions over the years by victims to do so. They owe all victims of this medieval tribunal system reparations and public apologies. And please give this statement your full attention. It's one thing to have the college review and discipline doctors on matters that relate to their profession. However, sexual assault is a criminal code violation, plain and simple. The CPSO has no more right to interfere with the criminal justice system than a police officer has to remove an appendix. Now to your questions. 1. Do I have any feedback on the current definition of sexual abuse as defined by the Regulated Health Act of 1991? Any, and I do mean any, unwarranted sexual act of any description is an assault, plain and simple. It's an insult to intelligence, attempting to label and categorize various acts of assault. Then to put them into a hierarchy of abuse, well, it's a clear indication that the wrong people are holding the baton. 2, Do you have any input on the disciplinary orders that may be imposed by health regulatory colleges against their members who have been found to have sexually abused a patient? It's blatantly clear that the college's support for the offending doctors far outweighs any consideration for the victims. Thou shalt do no harm means nothing to offenders. And the CPSO's mandate is to, quote, serve and protect the public interest, end quote, is definitely off the radar, except when the spin doctors at the CPSO parade it in documents so as to appear they care. Offending doctors are not meeting the higher standard of fiduciary duty, and the CPSO has proven they do not have the skills to handle it. The province has recently stated there are no simple answers and the responses must be as broad-reaching as the problem. Well, there is a simple answer, if there is the will. Self-regulation must be removed by the minister and put into the hands of the police and courts. And I need to repeat this. Self-regulation must be removed by the minister and put into the hands of the police and courts. Self-regulation is a privilege. It is not a right. And the minister has a duty to the public, not the colleges. Both the minister and the colleges are in place to serve the public, not themselves or each other. And the police, law, and courts must also be brought up to standard immediately. The Ontario government can and should attend to this immediately. Alternatively, an arm's-length criminal system with full parties standing for the victim and made up of a cross-section of society, including women with experiential expertise and excluding healthcare professionals, except, of course, for expert witnessing, might work and would need to be tested. The CPSO has systematically supported and protected offending doctors at a double sting to the victims and in disregarding the rights of the public. I am stunned that a perpetrating doctor, where it is historically rare for these offenders to be found guilty in this warped tribunals, has been given the luxury to continue working with a chaperone nurse, present, or with a simple stipulation of only attending to male patients. Did anybody even consider transgender, queer, or questioning persons who may be at the hands of these offending doctors? What alternate universe are the people that dreamed this up living in? Number 3, please comment on existing support tools for patients who may have been sexually abused by a regulated health professional, or provide input into possible future tools. Let's get things in order, shall we? Why aren't you asking about zero tolerance? Remember that phrase? And what happens when the offender is a therapist? Please. Support would be found in the criminal justice system, where full extent of the law, full party standing for both parties, and monetary reparation prevail. Now that's straightforward, clean, and effective. Oh, and there's bonuses with this. It also provides a deterrent, because up until now there hasn't been any, and a public record of the crime. This is what victims and the public are screaming for. And please stop with the skewed thinking that a victim should go to another doctor for therapy paid by the taxpayers through OHIP. I'm not aware of this college putting their hands in the till for this expense, except for a few crumbs to cover babysitting and transportation if needed. But again, you're welcome to prove me wrong. Please give me your full attention on this. Whenever the victim feels they need in their choice of therapy should be given to them. The infantilizing practice of the college handling victims through the OHIP system covered by therapy needs to stop. It must be the victim's choice. Taking money from pocket A and putting it into pocket B in the same pair of pants is a big problem in our minds. And if the victim has been assaulted by their therapist in the first place, It boggles the mind to even consider this. 4, please provide your input into possible mandatory reporting requirements with respect to the sexual abuse of patients by regulated health professionals. The question of possible reporting stymies us. It shouldn't even be up for discussion. How many times around the merry-go-round is this subject going to spin? It's an insult question. However, when there is any disclosure, it must be immediately reported with every safeguard in place for the victim and provisions made for them for what they need and require. 5, what do you feel are ways to further encourage and support patients who report incidents of sexual abuse to health regulatory colleges? Public disclosure while protecting the victim, prosecution to the full extent of the law for abusers, and monetary reparations for victims is a start. And put the complaints process into the hands of the criminal law, where they will be a public record of guilt. 6, do you have any input about opportunities for public participation in college discipline processes and proceedings? Well, as I've already stated, we don't support the college discipline process. Complainants should be before the courts, not the colleges. Again, an alternative arm's-length criminal justice process under the auspices of the Attorney General may be palatable. Of course, transparent oversight in all times is a must. And number 7, simply remove the self-governing privilege from the colleges. It certainly can and most assuredly should be done. They, especially the colleges of physicians and surgeons and the College of Dentistry, have consistently proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that self-regulation is self-serving. They protect their offenders at every turn and re-victimize the victims. Now, I have just a few questions for you and the government. Premier Wynn's promise and the social media views of the awareness PSAs have been huge. What's prevented the task force from utilizing social media too? Is there some arm's length website that has been announced across social media that we're not aware of? I would like to know. 2, why hasn't a suit and discipline been brought forward toward the CPSO for keeping a disbarred lawyer on the payroll and influencing complaints, and for allowing offending doctors to go off the radar in courts of appeal? 3, how is it that no important changes from the task force 2000 have been implemented? 4, why haven't reparations, excluding therapy to victims, been part of the process? 5, why hasn't survivors been part of the process in adjudicating when doctors have? And 6, why are offenders allowed to continue working at all? 7, what will the government do to order the CPSO to make reparations to victims and offenders found guilty and for having been re-victimized through the tribunal? A sorry doesn't cut it, but a public apology and reparations goes a long way to healing. Why don't the colleges work together across the country and around the globe with respect to offenders pulling up stakes and working elsewhere when found guilty? The colleges must stop these violators from hanging up a new shingle with complete anonymity to abuse again in some other territory. And we all know what's going on. And 10, Health Minister Hoskins stated sexual violence is unequivocally unacceptable. And the government's It's Never Okay action plan is in place and it looks promising. So, can victim survivors truly be assured that it truly is never okay, or will it still be okay sometimes in some institutions? And how solid will that action be? Will it be more tweaks and loopholes to be taken advantage of, or will some rock-solid, effective action take place sooner rather than later? Thank you, ladies. I look forward to yours and the government's answers.
Thank you very much. It's really important, and for me, it's an honor to be with you again. The 15 years that have passed since the last task force report, I think, have brought many changes and much lack of change at the same time, and you've given us a perspective from your own experiences and your expertise, which we really appreciate. Your questions are tough. they are appropriate. To the extent that the task force can answer them, we will endeavour to do so. To the extent that they're directed to the Government of Ontario, we will ensure that they are passed with the transcript of today's hearing. And I have a number of questions. At the same time, we do have a commitment to hear from the Ontario Federation of Indigenous Friendship Centres, so our time will be limited with you for this morning. I want to reiterate how much we welcome any further points that you want to make, recommendations, but let me just ask a couple of quick questions and then also ask Sharon McDonald if she has. You've used the plural term a number of times, we. Is there still an organization that you're involved with that is doing the advocacy? And if there have been challenges along that advocacy road, could you share them with us?
Yes, when I say we, I'm referring to the survivors of medical abuse. We've been around 25 years. Yeah. We are non-funded, never have been. Okay. We are a self-help advocacy, we support, we counsel, we advocate, we do a number of things, born out of our collective need to illuminate this horrendous problem.
Can I just ask, in addition to that, whether, in your estimation, there has been a sufficient investment by the Government of Ontario in civil society, in non-governmental organizations, in the advocacy processes on this issue? And if not, if you could indicate where you think investment should be.
One word answer, no. They have not. However, with these 3 PSAs that Premier Wynne has just put out with over 7 million views on social media, have been effective. I do not understand, well actually I do, why more use isn't made of social media. That's where most of the world is doing things. Mm-hmm. And it's free. What does it cost for a website, a Facebook page, a Twitter account? Those should be ongoing, and there should be continuing to make more of these PSAs. I think it's a brilliant way to deal with it. There should be a new one every month, and they should be put out constantly. We learned how to buckle up. We learned how to quit smoking. And those were times when the government got involved and did PSAs and educated broadly. Mm-hmm.
Just I want to ask a supplementary question to my previous one, because you've responded with the social media recommendation, which is excellent. Thank you. The question was drawn partially from your observation of the public monies that are contributed by the Government of Ontario to the Canadian Medical Protective Association, which is the source for most of the legal representation for doctors who face complaints in the self-regulating system. So my question to you is whether you have any comment or suggestion for consideration about investments of public monies in advocacy groups, in accountability mechanisms within the larger public system in relation to preventing sexual abuse of patients.
Well, yes, I would like to know, and here's another thing you can add to the list, have any doctors that have ever been found guilty paid back their legal fees? Couldn't get an answer years ago, so I'm hoping that maybe you will be able to. Yes, there should be monies put into advocacy, but I do believe that if you're going to help with doctors' legal fees, then why not complainants? Well, why aren't they getting... I mean, like I said earlier, the whole system is broken and needs to stop. We need a brand new system where there's equality before the law.
And that brand new system, in your opinion, should be strictly under the Criminal Code of Canada and through the criminal legal system with police and criminal courts.
Yes, because, and as I said, it needs to be brought up to standard big time too. But at least with that, you get a deterrent, you get a public record, there's a possibility of monetary reparation, far more than you ever get. And you have full party standing. When they want to call you, well, you get to have a lawyer, do you not?
No.
Well then, maybe, like I said, it needs to be brought up to standard. That needs to be fixed. Well, okay, something else then. Something, as I suggested, that might be outside that but works closely with or has the same idea, that it's public record, it's deterrent, it's full extent of the law, etc. We need to talk about it. We need to create something that works, not keep trying to fix and Band-Aid what's not working.
In the 2000 task force report that you referred to, what about accountability to the patient, to which you made strong contributions? The proposal, which has not been acted on, but the proposal was to change the access of patients through a government-funded patient access center that was not controlled and was not located within colleges. I want to make sure I understand that today your sense is that there is no use in trying to change the civil system that operates now with self-regulation, that all of that should be discontinued, and that it should only be changes to the criminal legal system in relation to sexual assault as it's defined in the Criminal Code of Canada.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, doctors still need to, I mean, there's nothing wrong with self-regulation as far as the profession itself is concerned, but when you're talking criminal code violations of sexual assault and violence against women, for the most part, they don't know what they're doing, or they do know what they're doing, and they're well protected. And when taxpayer money through the Ontario Medical Association is covering the costs, but the victims aren't getting anything, this is really skewed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Hope that answers it, okay?
Yes. Let me just ask Sheila.
No, I'm good. Thank you very much.
Okay. Again, thank you so much for making the time and for your incisive commentary.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.